The core technology here isn't TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn, or books or poetry or whatever. The core technology is storytelling.
Aaron Denton, an entrepreneurship professor at Duke University, a social marketing expert, and former tech founder whose work has been featured by Wired, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal.
What I'm always kind of telling students to do and encouraging people who are looking at social media and stuff to do is to zoom out and understand what the core technology here is. Successful content creators, successful social media creators are wildly unselfish. They're thinking about what is going to create value for my audience. Aristotle actually taught us everything we need to know about how to create good social media content thousands of years ago. When you're building an audience, a personal audience on social media and personal brand around yourself, the best way I think to think about it is to think of yourself as...
So a lot of you are probably interested to grow on social media, growing your Instagram, your Medium. Well, today we have a professor who specializes in this area. Aaron Denton is a faculty at Duke University. And not only has he grown his own Instagram and Mediums to over 100,000, he helps students learn social marketing and entrepreneurship. Aaron, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I was so glad when you reached out because there's not that many people in the Triangle who are creators.
There's all sorts of good startup companies and good biotech companies, but the creator industry it's not as strong here as it should be, as it will be. It's growing. It's growing.
So how did you manage to get Duke to give you a position teaching social media to students?
They didn't. I can't say they certainly hired me with the idea that you're going to teach social media to students. I was actually building venture-backed tech companies, first out of the area, but then I moved to the area when my wife came here to get her PhD. And I was building a company, but I had a PhD in English literature on the side, which I guess is a weird thing to have on the side. But I did, and I love academia. I wanted to stay connected to an academic community, so I just hung out around Duke for a few years and helped, mentored students, did talks, things like that. Kind of showing the professional world of entrepreneurship. And eventually, someone asked if I would teach a class, and I was really excited. That was my core reason. I hoped eventually someone would let me teach a class because I love teaching. I love working with students. And that class somehow kind of spun into multiple classes. And at some point, the person in charge of the entrepreneurship program at Duke, she said, "Hey, we need someone to teach a social marketing class. So we want you to teach it." It was interesting because I didn't really know much about social media. We obviously used it in my company, but I've always been, I don't want to say anti-social. I never got the big deal. It wasn't for me. I don't spend a lot of time on social media personally. I wasn't, sitting there at the time. I guess it would have been going through Instagram every day. I didn't even have an Instagram account. But they needed someone to teach it, and I wanted to teach a class. So I said, sure. And as I started looking into how I was going to structure the class, what I started to understand is that social media isn't that different than social media is just media, right? And it's just the popular form of the media today. But throughout history, there's always popular media. Is that poetry? Is it theater? Is it prose? Is it novels? And so what I started to understand pretty quickly is all the poetry I'd been studying as a academic. Well, these poets, Whitman, Emerson, Thoreau, they were all actually creators in their day, right? So if we hop in a time machine and we travel back to the 1850s and talk to Walt Whitman, you wouldn't hear him saying, "Oh, I'm trying to be the next great literary figure." He'd be like, this is creative. I'm going to build a big audience for myself, and I'm going to sell things to that audience. And so when I saw this connection, I started thinking, oh my gosh, social media it's not the new silly thing all the kids are doing. It's actually just part of this much bigger trend in history, which is part of the kind of the most important technology, which is storytelling. The core technology here isn't TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn, or books or poetry or whatever. The core technology is storytelling, and then we just tell stories through different media.
This episode is brought to you by Interpret. Interpret unifies all your customer interactions, from Gong calls to Zendesk tickets to Twitter threads and App Store reviews, making them available for comprehensive analysis. As we've profiled in the newsletter, it's the trusted choice of product organizations like Canva, Notion, and Descript. They rely on Interpret to drive forward their voice of customer programs. What makes Interpret special is its ability to, 1, build customer-specific AI models that provide more accurate categorization. 2, connect customer feedback directly to revenue impact so you can prioritize confidently. And 3, uncover insights with their Wisdom AI Copilot so you have an intuitive chat interface to access your data. So if you want a custom model built for your organization, get in touch with the team at interpret.com/product growth. That's ENTERPRET.com/product growth. Is storytelling not audience building, not marketing, the core storytelling?
So the core value, the core technology at play is storytelling. And to understand why storytelling is the core technology, we just got to kind of zoom out on history. There's this well-known, not well-known, I guess, very niche academic, a literary theorist. Her name is Weichi Dimmock. She's at Yale, I think. And she has this concept. It's called deep time. And what deep time basically tells us is, we as humans, we tend to look at everything through these kind of 70 to 80-year-old time horizons because that's like how long we live. And so we tend to think of everything in these 70 to 80-year-old generational blocks. But the truth is, most big phenomena in the world, they exist over much longer periods. They don't stop and start right when you're born and right when you die, right? They're going over the course of hundreds of years, thousands of years even. And so I think what I'm always kind of telling students to do and encouraging people who are looking at social media and stuff to do is to zoom out and understand that the core technology here is about this gets really esoteric, but it's Freud. It's the death drive, right? What happens is, as humans, we're mortal. We die. Everything on some sort of time horizon eventually dies, and we're constantly fighting that. And Jacques Derrida calls this archive fever. The way we combat the inevitability that everything is going to die eventually is we try to preserve. And so we do that by creating these technologies that allow us to preserve and transmit information across generations. And there's a really important reason here, right? Basically, if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, we don't want every new human to have to learn the same lessons. Watch out for the pointy thing on that animal's head. If it hits you right here, you're going to die, right? We don't want everyone to have to learn that on their own. So we've invented this incredibly powerful tool, language, to do it for us. And before we had TikTok and Instagram, and before we had even handwriting, before we had language, we had to find a way of transmitting information. And so we did it through stories. So the fundamental technology is story. And it's this powerful technology that's been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. We don't even notice it because it's so ingrained in what we do. But that's everything. And then, you absolutely build audience around this thing that is so fundamental to being human.
It strikes me that storytelling was kind of the initial kingmaker or popularity anointer. Like, if you think about all the figures we've heard about in history, it's probably not exactly true what we've heard about Caesar or Cleopatra, but the stories have been told about them. We don't even want to get into the religious names just for controversy, but even those people, right? Stories have been told about them. They've become immortalized through time through that.
Well, and honestly, the religious context, and not to get into it for the same reasons, but if you think about them, right, there's a reason Jesus speaks in parables. Right? Story is how people learn, how people understand things. They're so powerful.
I always say Warren Buffett is the original finance content creator, right? It's like whether it was 1,000 years ago or 60 years ago in Warren Buffett's case, like creating content via story has always been a part of humanity.
Always. And so once you start to understand it as that, I think it's such an important shift for people to get, because especially I want to say older people, people who still look at social media and think of it as like, oh, that's the silly thing the young kids do. Is like, well, no, they're just using a different platform. But once you understand it in this much broader context, you go, oh, I see why I should be using these tools to further my business and my career.
Yeah, I think another example is like my hobby is rock climbing. And like 20, 30 years ago, the way to make it as a rock climber was to get into magazines and to get into like these Hollywood productions about rock climbing. Now it's social media. The medium has changed, but what they're doing is the same.
It's fun. It's always the same. And that's humanity, right? We just do the same things over and over again because society evolves a lot quicker than humans evolve. Right? And so our fundamental needs are always the same. And so we're just figuring out how to serve those same fundamental needs with whatever technologies we have.
Even Mr. Beast, it's like he's all the game shows we used to watch on TV.
everyone, I had this really wild moment the other day, so when you start to realize you're old, right? Is my daughter found like a quarter on the ground, and she's like, "Daddy, what's this?" And it was so wild to have that moment because, like, how could you not know what a quarter is so kind of fundamental to just, it's money. But then it occurs to me, right? Of course, she never sees me spend, she never sees anyone use physical currency. So to her, she wouldn't know it. And that's what you have to remember. Like, humans, anything that happens before you're born or have general consciousness might as well have been ancient history. As far as you're concerned, we're getting to the point where this is always the thing that dates me is September 11th. I know exactly where I was September 11th, as most people who were alive then do, as I'm sure you do.
Yep.
And I was actually in a lab at Duke University because I was a freshman at Duke, and it was a 4-hour lab. So I walked in at 8 a.m. So before anything happened, and I didn't walk out till noon. And so I had no idea that anything had happened until it happened. But that building that was my lab is now changed into a different building. They moved the chemistry department somewhere else. And that's where I teach a lot of my classes. So a lot of times I'm physically standing in the same exact like room I would have been in when September 11th happened. And so if I'm teaching on September 11th, I'll stop and be like, hey, this is just an important moment to remember that the world can change in an instant. And it's always good to be prepared for that. And, I would give this PSA for the past, decade that I've been teaching. And originally people kind of got it. And now, I did it this year, and the students were like, so what was September 11th? And it occurs to me that they weren't even born, right? To them, it's ancient history. And yeah, so that's what humans do. Anything that happens before you're born might as well not happened. Might as well have happened 1,000 years ago.
For sure. So now I want to move into short form video. This is one of those areas that I feel like you've totally mastered. You not only like do it regularly, but you also have the theory behind it. So let's start at the top. Like, what makes a particular short form video work? Like, what are the types and why do they work?
So by no means have I mastered short form video. So I just experiment with it a lot. But I call it my research. That's the cool thing about being an academic. I say, no, I'm on TikTok for research. The core of a short form video is, so I always tell people that it's 85% of success comes from the structure. Right. And a lot of people think it's about coming up with brilliant ideas. But the truth is, right, you see successful content in every niche. And things that you would think are boring, like woodworking, where there's people doing amazing content where they're just carving something, right? So it's like, well, how is that great? Well, it's because structure accounts for, let's say, 85% of success. And there's a core structure. There's two kind of components of structure that you want to think about. So first we want to think about like the kind of story arc of the piece, right? So you've got a hook, you've got forward-leaning tension, and you got a satisfying conclusion. And that's the core element. What's going to get you interested? And of course, the hook is, and it's in every piece of content. Yeah, short form video, but also an article or a tweet or whatever it is. You've got that kind of initial interest on a piece of social media, or on a video, and short form video, it's going to be the first 1 to 2 seconds. And of course, people are always talking about hooks. So what's going to get people interested? And then forward leaning narrative. So getting a good hook is going to basically get someone to say, oh, okay, I'll watch a few more seconds, right? They haven't agreed to watch everything, but they're going to watch a few more seconds. So you've got to keep their interest intact. And so you've got to build tension. And when I say tension, it's not, oh my gosh, is this person going to die? It's not that kind of like cinematic tension. It's just kind of a core question that needs to get answered. So I've been seeing a lot of these for some reason. It's, I guess it tells you something about my feed. But there's, stupid videos of people having their pets jump over like increasingly high towers of toilet paper or cups or something. Have you seen any of those?
Yes.
Well, so that's what I mean by tension, right? It's like, can my pet jump over? How high can my pet jump? And here's a really low bar that they jump. It's like, okay, well, that got me hooked. But now I got to see how high can they go. So that's the tension that's constantly building. And we know there's going to be some conclusion where they're going to jump over it and it's going to not fall down. So build that tension and then a satisfying conclusion, something that makes someone want to comment on it, share it, engage with, watch it 3 times, whatever it is, to show the algorithm that this is a good piece of content worth showing to other people.
I think that forward-leaning tension component is the one that probably a lot of people watching miss, because we try to create a lot of informational content. So we might create some hook, but then there's no tension. Like, how do you create informational content, not like, video or jokes or memes, but like information while creating tension?
So it all comes back to story, right? Stories have a narrative arc to it. And so, for example, when I'm writing, this is going a little away from video content, but we can get circle back there. But if I'm writing an article, usually a lot of my most successful articles aren't me just saying, here's how to do something or here's what something is. It's telling a story of an encounter that teaches a lesson. Right? So the best way to explain why venture capitalists don't want to hear that you're going to be cash flow positive in 18 months because they don't want you to be cash flow positive. They want you to keep spending money so they can keep investing and own more of your company. I could just say that and say, hey, you shouldn't tell venture capitalists in your pitch that you're going to be cash flow positive in 18 months. That's not going to do well. Instead, you tell the story, or I tell the story about, I'll never forget, I was pitching a venture capitalist and I had in my deck that, I was going to be cash flow positive 18 months. I had this graph and I was really proud of it. And the venture capitalist just started laughing at me. I'm like, what? Why are you laughing at me? He's like, because you're telling me you're going to be cash flow positive. I'm like, yeah, that's, I'm building a business. And he's like, yeah, but I'm a venture capitalist. I don't want you to be cash flow positive. And so telling that story built narrative tension that pushed people through the end. And so that's what we want to think about when we think about tension. And so in a video format, Mr. Beast is the king of this. He sets up a question. Hey, how many people, I'm going to put $500,000 in the middle of the circle, and these 100 people, the last person to leave gets the $500,000. Okay, that's wild. Sure, I'll watch that. And then narrative tension. Well, who's going to be the last person to leave? And so you got to think about all of your content in that way. And the easiest way to think about it is, or the lowest hanging fruit example is a list, right? Top 10 pieces of software to add to your customer acquisition stack. Number 10, number 9, so there's a reason top 10 lists don't start with number 1. You don't want to know the best one first. You got to know the best one last.
I love that. Yeah, the listicle is a really easy way to create forward-leaning tension. Are there other templates or structures people can lean on as they're trying to get into informational content in short-form video?
It's a great question. I would say anything that sets up a kind of a premise of you've got to keep listening. We've got to get there. Let me show you kind of a conclusion. So teaching people how to do something, by definition, sets up, right? So if I'm teaching you how to properly set up lighting in a studio, right? Well, I've got to get through everything to kind of know, see the end result. So that's a way to doing it. Another way to kind of set up tension is so let's see, what would I go with? So interviews can do well. You can set up tension with, so there's another, again, ancient historical tactic that's been around for thousands of years, is the way you start your content is, there's a term, it's called en media res. Right? So if you think about the Iliad and the Odyssey, it doesn't start at the beginning. It starts in the middle of the narrative, in the middle of the story, media res, in the middle. And so a great way for setting up narrative tension is don't start at the beginning. That's how we're trained to think of story, but start in the middle or start at the climax and then go back and say, like, how did we get here? Right. So in the case of the venture capitalist story, I told you, it was like a venture capitalist laughed at me in the middle of my pitch. Here's why. And then you want to get to like, okay, how did we get to that interesting moment?
Okay. So if you're creating product management content, I got a job at Uber as a PM. Here's how.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Whatever kind of the climactic, and again, climax isn't someone saves the world. It's just like the end result people want to get to. So I got a big promotion because I did this, or I had my successful product launch. Took in $10 million in the first day. Here's how I got there.
You have some short form videos that have gone truly viral, like 20, 30 million views on TikTok. When you go look at those, what is different about those videos?
Oh, gosh. So, it's interesting. I had some of those big successes early on and had no idea, when I was posting them, that they were gonna do that. And I look back and I'm like, holy cow. Now I can put a piece of content up and I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be a good one. This is going to hit. And so I guess my answer there is like, what makes a piece of content viral? Well, so this is the other. So if structural considerations of format. So we talked about have a great hook, forward leading tension, satisfying conclusion. That's the fixed stuff. Everything has to, you can't put the hook at the end, right? You've always got to have the hook at the beginning. Now, style is the other part of structure that leads to outcomes. And again, we can go back historically, Aristotle actually taught us everything we need to know about how to create good social media content thousands of years ago. And he gave us the rhetorical modes of persuasion. So ethos, pathos, logos. You probably vaguely remember hearing that from like a literature class at some point when you were in 10th grade. Ethos, credibility. Why should I listen to this person? The best form of credibility on social media is following. If you already have 1 million followers, 10 million followers, like, yeah, okay, you've got credibility. But there's other ways to create credibility. So for example, there's a reason that my content in a classroom does better than content when I'm not in a classroom. Well, it's because look, like it's showing without anyone having to say, hi, my name is Dr. Din, I teach entrepreneurship at Duke. What it does is it says this person is a professor and therefore I should listen to it. It gives credibility. So ethos, and then pathos, which is emotion. The most valuable thing in social media is emotion. We know that from what works on with politicians. Getting people upset or making people feel good or whatever it is, that works. That always works. Having cute animals, things like that, or beautiful people. As I say, I bet if I was more attractive, I would have 10 times more followers. So I would be the hot professor, but I'm not, and I accept that.
But you go for the professor look, I've noticed.
It's about the set, right? It's about signaling. It's because you don't have time to say, "Hi, everyone, my name is," and, here's why you should care, and so you want to signal. Like, so I'll create content in a classroom, and I'll be wearing a tweed jacket because people see that, and then they immediately know, okay, this is professor without me having to say it, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
So you've got, so ethos, pathos is emotion, logos, logic, having stats, figures, rational arguments, and ethos, pathos, logos. So how do you put those into your content? So my content that does well usually has really good ethos, really good pathos, really good logos, kind of all those things. But there's actually a secret fourth mode of persuasion that we nobody talks about anymore. And it's because it doesn't have a good direct translation into modern English. And so it's just kind of fallen off with time. But that fourth mode of persuasion is kairos. So it's actually, Aristotle told us about ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos. Nobody ever talks about kairos. Kairos is loosely translated timing, but not how long something takes. It's timing in terms of, good in the moment, well timed. So for example, during, if you ever notice on social media, the day after the Super Bowl, there's lots of people making some sort of reference to the Super Bowl halftime show. And that makes sense in January, early February, because it just happened. But if you make reference to the Super Bowl halftime show in the middle of August, that content isn't going to do well. So timing is hugely, hugely valuable. And so my best content tends to have good ethos, pathos, logos, and kairos.
Yeah, kairos really struck me as an insight when I started posting on Twitter, which I feel like is the ultimate real-time bubble. But I've also noticed this on TikTok where the timing of things really matters.
Yeah, it's even at the point where creators understand this, and it's they're sitting there waiting for an event and kind of putting it, and just creating content instead of caring about the event, right? So again, Super Bowl halftime show is a great example. I mean, there's content about the Super Bowl halftime show within minutes of the halftime show ending. How is this happening? Well, it's because creators, I don't care about the Super Bowl. I care about the concept here. It's a fundamental concept that I don't know who coined this term, but I love it. So I use it all the time. So sorry, internet person who invented this, back in the 90s. The concept is called traffic leaking. The idea, have you ever heard of traffic leaking? Oh, so traffic leaking, it kind of goes to the early days of SEO, but the idea is, there's already, so rather than just trying to create content and putting it out there and hoping people discover it, you want to go where there's already a big community of people and pull traffic from that. So a search engine is an example of traffic leaking as well. If someone's going looking for best pizza in Durham, you want to get in front of those people because they're clearly looking for what you have rather than just putting up your pizza website and hoping people find it magically. And so kairos is functioning as traffic leaking. If everyone's talking about the Super Bowl, you should go do Super Bowl content because That's where the people are. There's this great quote from I think there's this famous bank robber in the 1930s. His name was Willie Sutton, and he robbed lots and lots of banks. When they finally caught him, the press is all there, and they're like, Willie, why do you rob banks? And he just looks at him and he's like, because that's where the money is. And it sounds so stupid, doesn't it? Like, well, yeah, of course that's where the money is. But when you stop to think about it, you go, oh yeah, why would you rob anything but a bank if you're trying to get money? And the same thing is true for content. That's where the people are, right? So if the people are all talking about something, don't try to get them to talk about something else. Lean into what people are talking about. Another phrase for this is trend jumping. So Mr. Beast is freaking great at this. A lot of what he does is trend jumping, and good creators, they look to the future and they say, okay, what's coming up? And they prepare content. So we're filming this in October. Halloween's coming up. So, if you know Halloween's coming up, create your pumpkin related content now, people, so that when Halloween's there, you've got it ready to drop.
Yeah. So you almost plan ahead. You can pick certain trends that you know are coming.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's really social media in a nutshell is, looking at temporally what's going on in the calendar and being in advance of that. And by the way, this isn't new to social media magazines. The fall issue is Thanksgiving themed and Christmas themed issues, and the love issue in February. And that's been there for a long time, and TV shows do it too. Yeah, if you ever binge watch old shows, and there's always the Christmas episode because that's what people are talking about. So you can look at it, calendar. There's events that are always coming up. You can say, the next Squid Games is going to come out, and when the next Squid Games comes out, there's going to be a lot of people talking about it. So maybe you should go ahead and prep your Squid Games content for that. So you can kind of look at what pop cultural things are coming. Taylor Swift is going to release a new album or whatever, and then of course there's things that you can't predict, like giant hurricane comes through. And that's what the news does, right? The news is functionally a giant mechanism of trend jumping, right? The news is like, what's going on? Okay, let's talk about that, because that's what people are interested in hearing about. And that, by the way, goes back to Benjamin Day in the original penny press. So this is the 1800s. The Daily Sun, I believe, I think the Daily Sun. Benjamin Day, the invention of the penny press. So we think of news. Our conception of news is a very modern conception of news. This idea of events that are happening right now, and I need to know what's going on in the world right now. But if you went back to kind of the late 1700s, early 1800s, that's if you picked up a newspaper back then and it was a month old, like that's cool. That's kind of what you would expect, is a general discussion of the world. And then Benjamin Day comes along as printing technologies improves, and he launches what's called the first penny press, which, as the name says, it was available for a penny. And so what he's got to do is he's selling it for much cheaper, so he's got to sell a lot more. And so in order to sell a lot more, he's got to get things that people care about now. And so he starts talking. One of the most popular sections are the crime briefs, what's going on in New York. And so that starts to change our public perceptions of what we're going to get out of our media. And so he's publishing every day. And now we're going to hear new updated stuff every day. And so it starts to change consumer mindset to, I need current events going on right now. And what's funny, what's driving all of it is the same thing that drives news today, which is publishing. Not publishing, same thing that drives it, which is marketing, right? So Benjamin Day isn't making his primary revenue off of subscriptions like newspapers before his. Instead, it's about advertising and getting advertising done. So he wants as many eyeballs as possible so that he can make as much money as possible with ad revenue. And this is when the media starts to move from a kind of I don't want to say it wasn't biased before, by the way. It was wildly biased, right? Newspapers before Benjamin Day and the penny press, you think like Hamilton, if you ever watched Hamilton, right? They were all supported by political parties. And then Benjamin Day is the one that starts transferring to supported by advertisers. And so now news is driven entirely by advertising. And this is why, by the way, news is so polarized and fragmented now. It's because in the advertising world, it's actually not valuable to have big, broad audiences. That's not useful for the vast majority of products. If I'm selling Depends diapers, right? Depends adult diapers, I actually don't want an audience of 1 million people who are ages 15 to 85, every gender, every race. I want, white men ages 65 and older who are dealing with incontinence. And so what you have is then you wind up getting news that says, okay, well, we should create content that specifically gets that audience. And so it doesn't need to be 1 million people. Maybe it only needs to be 100,000. But if it's 100,000, white affluent males over the age of 65, we can sell certain products and make a lot more money. And so news is intentionally polarizing because it's all driven by advertising dollars.
So it's intentionally polarizing. It's intentionally niche. It also seems like negative news tends to do better. Why is it that there's like a greater success with the negative valence than the positive?
The phrase in media is, if it bleeds, it leads, right? It's been like that for a long time. If you think about, so there's a plane crash, and like that makes all the headlines, and because that's the story, and you would think planes must crash all the time, and it's such a huge danger. But the reality is, plane travel is wildly, wildly, wildly safe. And so it's the aberration, it's the unusual thing that gets our attention, because it's different. And that's biology. It's zooming out and understanding that we're functionally animals that, operate with, essentially the amygdala, right? The amygdala is that lizard brain deep in the back of our head that basically processes out all the noise of what's not interesting and not worth our higher order processing. So for example, I'm sitting here right now and I am not at all worried that the chair under me is going to collapse or that the roof on top is going to collapse, because my amygdala is basically said, hey, this is a structure. It looks sound. It looks safe. Nothing to worry about here. But if I was, walking in and suddenly I noticed that there was a big crack in the ceiling before I sat down, it would be my amygdala to say, hey, let's put some more brain cycles to see if that's a danger we should worry about. And so that's what's going on. It's we are trained as humans to look for the thing that might kill us, right? If you're walking, and we want this, it's a good thing. Right? If you're a caveman and you are suddenly hear rustling in the bushes, you want to go, well, is that a saber-toothed tiger that's about to jump out and eat me, or is it a squirrel? And so that amygdala sends it up to the higher order processing, goes, oh, no, squirrel, we're good. And so the same thing is happening in content. So that's why the big kind of outliers are the thing that get our attention. And then we start to think those are normal, but they're not. They're, by definition, they are the aberration.
Love it. So going back to our hook and forward-leaning tension, in a hook, you might want to put a crack in the house structure if you want to talk about the house. So if we're talking about informational PM content, you might want to cite that Amazon Meta has just laid off 10,000 people yesterday. Here's what's going on in the tech market, something like that.
You're getting it. It's I call it tickling the amygdala, because I think it's a fun phrase. But basically, if you think about the act of scrolling through your phone, and for people just listening, I pulled out my phone and was scrolling, right? And so it's very much this process of the amygdala going pass, and then something captures our attention. That's the hook that says, hey, I should push this up to higher order brain function to see if this is worth my time. This, by the way, is why thirst traps work so well. You're scrolling, and look, skimpily clad girl in a bikini or a guy with washboard abs. Ooh, the sex drive suddenly goes, hey, amygdala, let's process this up and see if we pay attention. It's you're doing the same thing as a PM, I guess, right? And trying to create PM content. It's what's going to capture the attention of someone interested in product management, and I guarantee the thing that's going to capture them is the aberration, the outlier, or the end goal, or the desire, or the result, not the kind of the long process of how to do it.
And so this is why if you interview a chief product officer, there's that desire for every PM to become a chief product officer. So that's the hook. Staying on short form video for a little longer. So we've talked a little bit about the theory. So now let's get into more of like the operationalization of it. How often should somebody be shooting short form video? How should they start from it? Is it just like you buy a $10 tripod for your phone? Like, where do you start and how often should you be doing it to get good at it?
Sure. Number one rule. Number one is called actually 1 through 100 rule for becoming successful putting out content is to just post content. Period. I can't tell you how many people they don't get successful and they're not posting anything. And so the first thing I always work with any of my students, with my clients. So I have my day job at Duke, but I also have a consulting firm where I work with CEOs and business leaders, as well as bespoke public figures, athletes, musicians, actors, politicians, things like that. And the number one rule before I even take on a client is like, are you already posting something? It can be terrible. You can have 50 followers and get no traction, but you're posting every day. I can make you great. But if you're not already inclined to be posting, that's the hard part, because it's a habit. It's a daily habit. And when I say daily, I used to say like, yeah, maybe it's not daily and stuff like that. No. Now I just say do it daily. If you are not doing this every day, you're not going to be successful, at least in the beginning. Sure, 10 years from now, when you've grown, a 50 million person audience, you can take a few days off. But in the beginning, you've got to do it every day. It's because you have to build the habit. It takes the research tells us it takes 66 days to build a habit on average. So, and that's for anything, not just social media, anything. This is why weight loss is so hard, dieting is so hard, getting a gym habit is so hard, is because what happens is you want the results immediately. Humans, we want this instant gratification, and so we start like, okay, I'm losing weight, I'm gonna eat healthy, and then you start eating healthy, and you don't immediately have washboard abs, and you're like, well, this is stupid. Well, yeah, it takes 66 days to build a habit, and social media is the same way. So if you're going to get started, I just need you posting every day. So commit to it. And this is actually how I started on social media. So I was teaching myself. So I told you earlier, I teach my social marketing class, but I wasn't really big into social media personally, but I understood conceptually how it worked. And I had a guest speaker in. And he was on Medium, and he was posting, to Medium. And I was looking at this guy, and I was thinking, he's a friend, so I say this tongue in cheek. I'm looking at this guy, I'm thinking, like, if this joker can do it, like, well, like, I got a PhD in English, I know how to write, I can write articles. And so I committed, and I said, I am going to, come hell or high water, I am going to put out 2 articles per week on Medium every week for the next year. I just committed to it. I don't know why why I actually was able to follow through, but I committed to that. And so what happened is, the first, for the beginning, not a lot happened. I was actually, my second article went wildly viral, but I just got lucky. But then nothing else kept happening, but I kept kind of grinding, and I'd committed to this. And so I did it. And after about 3 to 4 months, it became such a natural part of my week that I was going to be writing articles. And you know what happened actually, as I was writing these articles, because they were articles about entrepreneurship, and I was teaching entrepreneurship, and it turned out to be great ways to think about entrepreneurship and get better at entrepreneurship and get better at explaining and understanding how these fundamental principles worked. And so it became this kind of core, like sitting down to write an article is not me creating content for the world. It's actually me thinking. It's kind of neat that my thinking helps so many people, because all I'm doing is I need to wrap my head around a concept. And so it became such a core part of my thinking that, within 3 months, I did it because I loved it, because it was a part of who I was. And now I do it every day just because it's how I've grown to see the world. But again, it didn't happen overnight. It took time to build the habit. So the advice to get started, yeah, if you're if the best way for you to create content is, as soon as you wake up in the morning, your alarm goes off and you roll over and you just pulled up your iPhone and you're like, hey, everyone, I decided to tell you about product management today. Cool. Do that. Just get into the habit. And you're going to start to see what works. You're going to start to improve. You're going to start to get excited about it. You're going to start to iterate on your own once you've got that habit. Okay. So you can just start with your phone. You don't even need a tripod, but just start posting. Please start posting. And the gear, one of the worst habits you can make, and I kind of see you have it here. Right? You've got all this like incredible equipment. And sometimes like the equipment is fun. Like you can nerd out. It's so like techie, producty people. I'm a software engineer by trade. Like I love nerding out over like equipment. I got a new camera coming I'm really excited about. But like you can't let that stop you. Oh, I don't have the best camera, and therefore I'm going to wait till I get this camera or this microphone. Because because you're going to get zero growth if you don't put out anything. Yeah. I like what Mr. B said, like make 100 videos, improve each one if you're coming to ask me for help. And guess what? You won't even need my help after 100 videos. That's what I've started telling, because a lot of people reach out and, they say, how can I grow? And I say, well, tell you what, go and for the next 3 months, post a video every day. And then let's look at what you've done. And by that point, either they didn't do it, which means they didn't need my help, they weren't serious about it, or they've done it and they've kind of figured it out, because 3 months is about 100 videos. So, hey, look, Mr. Beast and I we clearly think alike. We must be besties. So what is your workflow for like shooting a short today? Like, do you plan like, I'm gonna need an empty classroom, so I'm gonna go to an empty classroom. Do you have like 5 or 6 shorts in your head already that you're gonna go film, or how does it work? So I optimize for for ease. So I sacrifice video quality, audio quality, lighting quality for being able to get it done. And so for me, what I prioritize is having a really portable set of equipment that can give me 80% to high end, but I can set up and I can carry it on my back with me wherever I go. And so I just always have my equipment with me everywhere I go. And a big part of that is because my style of creative, the kind of content I'm doing is I'm trying to reach an audience that students and people interested in higher education, and I have a lot of parents who also follow me. And ultimately, I'm not creating content for me; I'm creating content for them. And I understand that the content that's going to be valuable for them is often content that gets made in the moment or gets made with students, or it has some sort of relationship to how they're going to be able to leverage this very, very expensive investment. College is expensive, right? It's an investment, and so I want to help them understand how to leverage this investment to the absolute maximum. And the best way to do that, of course, is to be interacting with students and showing that and kind of taking those moments. And sometimes you don't know when those moments are going to come. So my best content is content that I'm making in the moment. And so it's it's grainier, it's got poorer audio quality, but it's there and it's live. And then my next level of content down, because those I'm not with students 100% of my time, right? So I've got to find other content. Then that's I try to batch. So I'll go into a classroom and I'll have 3 or 4 things I want to knock out, and I'll change outfits or whatnot in order to get that content out. So it's it's got a little different setting, different kind of lighting, different whatever. And that stuff is usually, I think it was in my head, I think I call it my filler content. Not that it's bad content. I understand like the gold is the in-person stuff, the stuff that I can capture with students in the moment of teaching.
That's what I've learned about video. Like Zoom is like the worst. In-person podcasts like this is a step up. But in life content, like during your class, is kind of the ultimate. You're in person, you're in class. How do you know when to pull out the camera? Like, when are you actually shooting? And then once you have the footage, how do you go back and like edit it and cut it together? I think most of your shorts seem to be like between 1 minute and 1 minute 30. So you probably have like, I don't know, 10 minutes at least that you've shot. How do you turn that into the final thing?
That's the part that always, when I'm like, I got to do the work, is I've got to, there's a weird trade-off, is like the more content you get, the more you've got to scrub through. And that's like the exhausting part of like, okay, now I've got to go pull the story out of this. And so, a lot of what I do is I just have a camera there and it's capturing a ton. And the better, so what I like to tell my clients and students is what you need to learn to do is live the creator lifestyle. So have a creator mindset and live a creator lifestyle. And what that means is you're always looking ahead. So I train my students and clients to sit down, find one day a week. For me, it's Sunday night. For a lot of people, feel like Sunday night's a good night. But if that's not like your start of the week, then figure out your start of the week and look ahead for that week. If I'm working with an athlete, I'm saying, okay, so you've got games in this city, this city, this city. So that means you're going to be on this plane, this plane, this plane. It's going to be this hotel, this hotel. Like, where are the content opportunities? And figure out those content opportunities ahead of time. You don't have to figure out exactly what it's going to be. Figure out the moments when there's probably going to be a good content opportunity, so that in the moment you've already planned and you know that you're going to capture content there. Because if you try to just like, I'll just know it when I see it, like that doesn't work. So if I could probably make a cool piece of content while I'm on the plane with my teammates. Well, then, like if you thought about that ahead of time, then you're going to know, okay, I'm on the plane now. I want to grab that content. And so I'm doing the same thing with I'm looking down and say, well, I'm now teaching this class, and this class, and I'm teaching these lessons. I'm lesson planning out. I like to think I'm a good, well-prepared instructor that's got my lesson queued up and say, in that lesson, there's going to be an opportunity to do this, this, and this. And so I want to make sure I have a camera there. And, and maybe that's as quote unquote simple as having a camera just set up in the corner of the room and it's going to capture something. Or maybe it's more like, I'm going to need to grab this shot and actually do this moment with my students. But either way, I've got a plan going in. And so then I'm capturing the content. And then once I've captured it, then I go back and I look, okay, what did I capture? Did I get good audio? There's always any creator knows, like the moment's like, you got this amazing picture, but like you didn't capture the audio. It's like, can I fudge it? Can I do a voiceover to cover this? And then of course there's the moments where I don't know how to describe it. You get off sequence on the camera. So you think you're pressing to start recording, but you're actually pressing to stop recording. And so like, here's the big moment, you press it and actually you just stop the camera. So what you wind up with is, 2 minutes of holding it on the ground and, not looking at anything. And then the best moment you totally miss. But so hopefully you got the good moments and then you go back and you piece together, okay, well, what's the story here? And that's where that kind of storytelling eye starts to come in. But yeah, so my process is thinking ahead and understanding where am I going to have content opportunities that are going to fit my audience. For example, I knew I was coming to record this podcast with you. So in my head, I said, okay, are there good content opportunities for my audience in coming in to record this podcast? And the answer was no. And not because it's not a great podcast, but it's because my audience doesn't care about me being on a podcast. That's not what they're there. That's not why they're there to see Dr. Din and hang out with students. It's too selfish a piece of content. It's me aggrandizing myself. Look at me, I'm being interviewed. And that's not going to create value for them. So that's not a piece of content. But I did take the time to think, oh, what am I doing today? Oh, recording a podcast. Is there a content opportunity there for my channel and my audience?
Yeah, I feel like most people, they get a bit lazy with their content because, they're on the daily grind. So they go in today to get the podcast. So the first thing they'll ask me is like, okay, can I get the raw video? I'm going to turn this into like 3 clips. But what I hear you saying, which is very different from the average person, is, well, what does my audience want? What is going to be valuable for me? This is not necessarily going to be valuable for a student or a parent. This is more about content and product management. So I'm not going to include that content. It's a very interesting, like, sort of decision to chuck some stuff out.
This is so the fundamental of social media. And again, a lot of, I call us old people and I group myself in here, is we think social media is very selfish, but no, successful content creators, successful social media creators are wildly unselfish. They're thinking about what is going to create value for my audience. And so let's tie this back to, this is no different than entrepreneurs. The best entrepreneurs are not thinking, ooh, how can I build $1 billion company for myself? Because if that's your mindset, you're not going to succeed. It's, oh, someone has a problem. How do I help that person solve the problem? And I would go so far as to say the best product managers are also thinking, how do I create something that's going to solve someone's problem? And so by definition, if you're an entrepreneurial person, if you're a creator, if you're a product manager, should always be thinking, what is my customer's problem and how do I help them solve it? And so in audience building, is I'm always thinking, like, I don't create content for me. I create content for my audience. I love my audience is amazing. They send me some of the most the wonderful emails. When I meet them in person, they're so incredible. And they're so thankful for the advice I gave them or the insight I was able to share. And I don't need to know how to apply for college. I don't need to know how to choose my major, because I already did all those things. So if I'm creating a video about, how to choose your major, then that's not for me, that's for my audience. And so if I took a video of me being in this podcast, that would be for me. Look at me, I'm fancy, I got interviewed. That doesn't help them. And I only care about helping them because that's what I do it for, is to help them.
So it's not even an Instagram story?
Is it? You know what? I don't do Instagram stories nearly as much as I should. This would maybe be an Instagram story. Maybe we'll do that.
I feel like that's the growth tactic on Instagram these days, right? Is to have 12 stories about how your day is going.
I haven't gotten into Instagram stories yet.
I think that's the creator mindset, creator lifestyle that you're talking about. That's what I immediately thought of as I probably need to do more Instagram stories.
It feels wildly selfish, right? So if I'm doing a story and say look at me, I'm here, why? And I shouldn't, because I guess I should realize that I've got a big enough audience now that they actually do care about me as much as I care about them, and maybe they would be interested in the fact that I'm sitting here, and that's what stories is for. I don't do it for me. I would be perfectly happy not posting on social media. I post on social media because I realize that's how I reach the people I want to help. And again, my students, to them, it's not weird. It's just life. And so if I don't accept that, then I'm doing a disservice to them. And so maybe you'll convince me to pull a story before we're done.
I think it could be an interesting test. All of my best performing content is the content about me, even though I generally 99.9% of the time just write about product management.
That has not been my experience. I posted a very selfish post the other day that I knew was selfish. And it wasn't even about me. It was about a lot of this stuff we're talking about here, about kind of the fundamental principles of social media. And so I was talking about are you familiar with the Get Ready With Me, GRWMs?
I see them everywhere.
Okay, so yeah, right. So I posted a piece of content explaining like the historical kind of lineage of a Get Ready With Me. So you see, Alex Earl, who's the not the creator of the Get Ready With Me, but the person who really popularized it. This blonde, she at the time University of Miami student who's always doing her makeup and talking about it. And she gives this enormous audience around this kind of concept of doing the Get Ready With Me. And I talk about the historical lineage and how actually this technique of talking to yourself, but actually talking to an audience that's not really there. That's not new thing. His soliloquies, Hamlet, to be or not to be, is he's talking to himself, but really talking to an audience that he kind of knows is there, but isn't there, right? Like, it's been going on for a long time. And so I posted this piece of content explaining that, which was totally for me. And I knew no one would be interested in it. It did not perform well at all. But again, that's the example of selfish content. And even though I was still teaching, so it wasn't about me, but it wasn't content for my audience. It wasn't what they were there to get. And so you have to be, I know it's going to be weird to say this, but humble as a creator. Is like, your job is not to create content for you, and you're not going to be successful if you try to create content for you. It's about helping people.
So returning back to your batch process, you mentioned that you do have a couple things in mind. You might even change outfits. So what things do you have in mind? Like, is it like a topic? Is it like a theme? Like, I'm going to do a Get Ready With Me, obviously not a Get Ready With Me, but like some sort of like theme of trending structure? Or do you go so far as to like have the script ready? Like, how much is it planned? How is it planned?
So it does depend on some level on the piece of content, but it's the creative process, or coming up with different content ideas. There's some, what I call or not like I came up with the term, but there's some I call set pieces that are kind of recurring content style. So I do I call it press conference style, where I'm like, I call it if professors gave press conferences. It's because there's this in Fuqua, the School of Business, where I'm housed at the university. There's these Zoom rooms that I think popped up during the pandemic time that have the very like the logo, perfect logo background that looks like you're giving a press conference. And so I was taken to going to those rooms and filming like answering questions as though reporters were watching my class. And I think they're really fun because what it does is it lets, it's a set piece that lets me have, commentary on a specific topic. Like, for example, I've got one coming up that's, why students never sit in the front row. And that's, they hate sitting in the front row. It's wild. They do not sit in the front row. And so, it's a little play on that, but it's a way of addressing it. Because again, this goes to story. If I just got up there and I said, hey, students, why don't you sit in the front row? You should sit in the front row. That's great. Like, that's not going to go, that piece of content isn't going to go anywhere. Instead, I can make that same point, but I can make it in a kind of a more interesting way through this kind of narrative of a press conference. So I have set pieces like that allow me to kind of comment on different topics, again, relating to my niche, the thing I think, my kind of general brand. And those, I'll come up with, sit down, I'll come up with the idea for them in advance. And I've got business partners that are, we'll sit down and we'll brainstorm ideas. I've taken to using ChatGPT a lot for brainstorm. People who don't understand AI and ChatGPT kind of just imagines like it does the work for you. And oh my gosh, nothing could be farther from the truth. It does not do the work for you, especially for someone who's kind of a creative in that field, who's an expert in that field, right? Like ChatGPT is nowhere close to creating anything that I'm going to create. I don't mean because I'm amazing or that it's bad. It's just, that's not what it's designed for. Instead, I found that AI and ChatGPT is a wonderful brainstorming partner that I'm often using to help me kind of iterate through different ideas, different concepts. And so I'll say, ChatGPT, I want to do this press conference, professor press conference satire. What are some common classroom tropes that, that would be worth commenting on? And it'll give me a list of them. And usually what happens in that, that list of 10, 15, 20, however many times I could ask it for 1 million, it would probably do it. Somewhere in there, I'll see something that it's interesting. I'm never like, oh, that's it. It'll say something and I'm like, oh, and then it triggers something I remember from my own experience. And then that becomes the core of it.
3 or 4 ideas ready before you go to a place.
Yeah. So I'll have the ideas ready. And then, something like the press conference, I will script out. I will plan what I'm going to say because it's got to be a little more of a dance because I have to have the questions asked to me. Otherwise, so I can't improv that very well. But so that'll be more kind of prep. But if it's like a lesson about how to think about choosing your major, well then I've talked to enough students over my over a decade and a half of teaching now. I think I'm getting close to 20. Okay, I don't want to do the math. I've talked to enough students about how to choose a major that I don't need to sit down and write a script. I can just kind of tell a story that I've already done.
Yep. So you don't necessarily need a script for everything unless there's two voices in the same video.
Yeah.
Okay, and say a little bit more about that. And you had a term for that, I think, last time we talked.
So when there's so this isn't necessarily what the press conference is, though it could be structured like that. The format is called 2 characters, 1 bulb. And so that's when if you're on social media and you see the same person, but now like they're in a wig over here and they're they're in a baseball cap over here. So it's 2 characters, 1 bulb. And it's just one of the cool things about the medium now of like social media. People are very much willing to use their imaginations to paint the picture around something. So you don't need, if this was Hollywood, right, you'd have multiple characters and actually playing their different roles. And like we need to be fully immersed in the magic of the fantasy of the scene. Now on TikTok, I can pretend to be someone just by putting a wig on, and now I'm a female student and that's just the character I'm playing, and my audience understands the tropes of the platform well enough to paint the picture behind them that yes, I realize it's the same guy talking, but now he's standing in for this character. So the fantasy extends in the audience's own mind as opposed to needing it to be perfectly mapped.
Yeah, so for everybody beginning, I think that's a really good format to do. Is the 2 characters, 1 bulb?
2 characters, 1 bulb.
Yeah, that's an awesome format that it seems to work really well. You can even probably do like 3 or 4 characters if you want, right? Just depending on the scenario.
Yeah, and what it does is it gets to the thing it all goes back to storytelling. We asked at the very beginning, how's storytelling audience, right? It comes back to that idea, like I could explain a concept of me just standing here saying, hey, here's what you need to know about, running meetings as a product manager, and pass, skip, whatever. Like that's not exciting. But now if I embody the different people who would be in the meeting, now you're telling the story of what it's like. And so you're teaching through parable, right? You're teaching through story.
And one of the reasons I personally think that format works well is because you actually get different scenes, which I've also noticed in your videos. Like one of your short forms that really popped off on LinkedIn was your NVIDIA post. So you were shifting like the scene like almost every second or two. I feel like you were like in the NVIDIA lobby, then you were at the Tesla parking lot, then you were walking with your students. There were like so many different scenes. It seems like there's something to video about changing the angle and what you're looking at.
So this goes into there absolutely is, and this is the kind of I'm trying to learn more about filmmaking. So bear with me. I'm by no means an expert in filmmaking, but these are kind of narrative tropes that have been understood for a long time in the cinema world. It's there's a great book that I'm reading, very short, so I should have already finished reading it, but I just haven't got there yet. But it's called In the Blink of an Eye. Kind of the intro of this book, what he talks about is the kind of early filmmakers. What they realized is the value of the cut. And so if you think about, as humans pre-film, we experience story through linear time. That's the only way we could possibly experience story. And the earliest movies were like that, as a single camera shot following some through, because that's how we thought story had to be told. But someone very early on in film realized like, ooh, if I jump from here, now I've got the angle of the hunky bachelor, and then suddenly I jump and show the angle of this other, the damsel in distress, and then jump back to the hunky bachelor. Like people can follow that. Or if I go from, we're here, we're in a car, and then boom, suddenly we are in a house, people can still follow that without any problem. And so that's the power of a cut. So, any film you've watched, right? It's, I don't remember the exact stat, but the amount of video per like minute you watch, it's something like, I think 10, 15 to 1 on average, right? So if you're watching a 2-hour movie, that's 120 minutes. So that there's actually 1,200 minutes of film there. And like in something like Apocalypse Now, I think it's like 90 to 1, right? It's like wild. And so the story is in the cutting. in the editing, and that's where the storytelling comes in. So now I've totally lost the thread of your original question because I've talked so long. Sorry, I answered long. Oh, you had asked, so a lot of these videos you see are me kind of cutting really quickly between different things. This is the aesthetic that does well on social media. It's like I've only got 60 seconds to tell a story. So I can't hey, everyone, I'm here at the NVIDIA headquarters. Let's walk in. Oh, we're walking in and over here. Right. But luckily audiences are really good at following these cuts. So they can say, ooh, here's the entrance. Oh, here's the lobby. Oh, now I'm in an office. Right now I'm seeing the parking lot with all the Teslas. Right. And audiences are really good at following that. So it's the power of cuts.
Okay. So for that specific video, let's break down how it happened, right? You were, I believe, for 4 weeks in the Bay Area. You were teaching students. So you probably captured like 4 weeks worth of video. I'm imagining like your computer just like, oh my God, I have like 10 hours of video, Apocalypse Now style, 10 hours of video for a 1 minute, 20-second short. That short ended up being. But it did get hundreds of thousands of impressions on LinkedIn. I'm sure it did well on Instagram and TikTok as well. How did you go about editing that? And I believe they ended up using voiceover for 95% of it. So when did you end up writing the voiceover? Is that after the video is edited? How did it go?
So those are great questions all around. Fun fact, that those videos did relatively poorly on Instagram and TikTok. They were much, much better on LinkedIn. I was shocked how well they did on LinkedIn, but that speaks to the different platforms and what people are looking for on the different platforms. So it was a case of, this was a case of, again, having that creator mindset. It's knowing, okay, we're going to tour the NVIDIA factory, or not the NVIDIA factory. We're going to tour the NVIDIA headquarters. I'm going to just have my camera and I'm going to just different shots. I'm going to create as I go. Right, we're going to go through the entrance here. So I might as well have my camera pulled up. We're going to go, and anytime I saw something interesting, I took the picture of it or took the little video of it, and then went back and told this, figured out kind of what the story was, and then wrote a script to narrate over and kind of narrate and explain what I'm seeing. So that would be the structure on something like that. One thing that's helpful to put into those kinds of things, if you wind up creating that kind of content that I do okay and I'd like to do better on, and I find are very effective, are the moments where you are going through the narrative and you talk to the camera, turn the camera on you and have some sort of kind of quippy commentary about what you're seeing. So that way it's not all narrative, but you've got this kind of moment of like, hey, you're a character in the video. There's a guy who does this incredibly well. I love his content. Phil is his name on TikTok, or his name is Phil. I don't know what his handle is, but he's this British, I think he was like a tour guide in England, and he started creating content about like different things to see. And he's gotten so big. He's got over 1 million followers now of basically him. He just goes to different tourist attractions in England. And what he does is he shows him and he talks about him, and then he inserts himself at, these kind of quippy, fun moments. And, and he has these recurring gags of like how much it costs to get a pint of beer in these different places and how just ridiculously expensive it is in London versus in some other places. But he shows up, and so he just takes a bunch of pictures, tells the story, and then he puts the kind of the narration in after.
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a SaaS app, at some point your customers will start asking for enterprise features like SAML authentication and SCIM provisioning. That's where WorkOS comes in, making it fast and painless to add enterprise features to your app. Their APIs are easy to understand so that you can ship quickly and get back to building other features. Today, hundreds of companies are already powered by WorkOS, including ones you probably know like Vercel, Webflow, and Loom. WorkOS also recently acquired Warrant, the fine-grained authorization service. Warrant's product is based on a groundbreaking authorization system called Zanzibar, which was originally designed for Google to power Google Docs and YouTube. This enables fast authorization checks at enormous scale while maintaining a flexible model that can be adapted to even the most complex use cases. If you're currently looking to build role-based access control or other enterprise features like single sign-on, SCIM, or user management, you should consider WorkOS. It's a drop-in replacement for Auth0 and supports up to 1 million monthly active users for free. Check it out at workos.com/Aakash to learn more. That's workos.com/Aakash.
So you write the script, you maybe take some of your clips that you filmed. I think in this video in particular, you took two. One was like you looking at the Teslas. The other was like, oh, I only thought Teslas could be seen at Silicon Valley. So those were the two clips. So you had those two clips like, okay, I'm going to write a script around it. How did you end up choosing the hook? Did you use ChatGPT to iterate on it? Did it just come to you? How did it come about?
So and I don't remember the hook on that exact video, but it wasn't a very good hook. Oh, actually, I do remember the hook on it. So this is traffic leaking. It was, NVIDIA is the hottest company in the world right now to talk about. So just saying like, hey, I'm going to the NVIDIA headquarters, a great hook because people care about that. Clearly they cared about that because they wanted to see it. And the building for NVIDIA looks like it's out of a sci-fi movie. And so I think I said something like, look, kids, it's the Death Star.
Yeah.
Is how I started it, just to make a joke on just the weirdness of the look of the of the NVIDIA headquarters. So that's part of the hook. And then the other part of the hook is so you've got a audio hook, and then you've got a visual hook, and then you want often a text hook. All right. So there's also text overlay, visiting NVIDIA headquarters. So people are getting kind of three different layers of trying to hook them into the video to watch more of it.
Awesome. 3 layers of hook. And the other fourth element that some of the experts I've talked to around this talk about sometimes is the music and the trending music. Do you think about that?
So trending music, I think, well, it's going to depend on your content. And so if you're doing dances, trending music around a dance is probably pretty good. But trending audio isn't as big of a thing as it used to be on the platforms, and so that's nice. Part of it is because they get into fights with the record labels about ownership, and so there's a lot that you can't use anymore. And sometimes if you use trending audio, 3 months later, it's a bit of a risk, because what can happen is the TikTok or Instagram can get in a fight with that music company and no longer have rights to it, and they have to go and they have to remove all the old audios that use it, and suddenly your video that had 5 million viewers and was still getting 100,000 every week, it doesn't have audio anymore and dies. So I think audio can be important depending what you're, or the kind of music in the background can be important depending what you're doing. But the way I would think about it in terms of the kind of content I do and the kind of content I imagine a lot of PMs do is think about like background music in a movie. If you've ever seen a movie without background music, but the same exact climactic fight without the background music, you realize how important the background music is to making, to setting the mood of the scene. And so it's actually really fun in the editing process to have a piece of content and it's fun and wildly frustrating to try to pick the music for it as you're editing and trying to put different tracks behind it. There's all sorts of royalty-free music services that you subscribe to, and then you can use that, you can use their library to score your videos. And you can take you can totally change the tenor of a piece from very serious to ridiculous based on if you have very, very climactic, dramatic, orchestral music in the background, or, stupid, kids music in the background.
Yep. So, okay. So you took all the video on the shoot. You had, I don't know, several hours of video. You came up with the script. It sounds like you recorded the voiceover. Then what tool are you using to pull the clips? It sounds like you're pulling the clips to your voiceover and then you're adding music. That's the word. And then adding text.
Yeah. So workflow is, you get so actually let's go back, right? Workflow is, hey, I know I'm going to be doing this thing. And so here are going to be probably the moments in that thing. So let me make sure I get it. And then as you're in that, you're not only filming those moments that you kind of imagine are going to be there, but you look for kind of other interesting opportunities. You get your raw footage and you go back and you scrub through the footage, and the scrubbing through the footage is hard. That's the exhausting part of all this, is absolutely scrubbing through the footage. You scrub through it. You find you start to get a sense of what your footage is. And for me, then I go and create this script with an idea of what the footage is. And I'm able to create that script kind of going back and forth between if I got a clip of myself saying something, or if I need to put voice over an image I saw to explain the image, and then upload into I feel dirty saying this because I'm sure lots of creators out there will judge me for not being like, well, I use Premiere Pro, or I use DaVinci Resolve. And I do use some DaVinci stuff, and I'm trying to get better, but I like to use Kapwing, Kapwing, free plug. They don't pay me for this. I pay them. But I use Kapwing. It's an online video editing service that's just really simplifies a lot of it for the kind of work I'm doing. If I start to do more kind of high level YouTube stuff, I mean, that'll be DaVinci Resolve. But like for shorts, it's fine and Kapwing. Upload it and then just start to chop up the content, find those cuts with that voiceover recorded, and try to sync the clips to the voiceover and the script that I put together, and then score it with get your captions. Because this is where being an English major, English PhD really hurts, is because I want everything to be grammatically correct, and I want good capitalization and punctuation and all that. So it takes me a little longer to do my captions than other people when I'm using the service. Get good captions in there, get the music in there, export it, pop it up on the platforms.
How long does that take?
Oh, forever. Just forever.
Like 5-6 hours at least, right? For that video?
There's no short way around it. It takes a long time. And I can't even begin to describe the number of times I rewatch the same video of myself. Just, so like I put it all together, I script it, I file it, and then, I'm watching through the captions, trying to get all the captions right. I'm watching it with 10 different audio tracks behind it. So I watch it with all these different music. And then you export it, then you go upload it onto TikTok, and I'm uploading it onto TikTok, and I'm like, and I wind up watching it there because you want to make sure you didn't have an error, like there was an error in the upload or something pauses or freezes or you miss something. So you watch it on TikTok. Then it's always good when you're on the platforms, or maybe I'm just superstitious at this point, but I like to put some sort of editing. I like to do some sort of in-app editing on TikTok and on Instagram, because the platforms prioritize that you use their app to create their video. And so, if I'll subtitle something, or I'll caption something or whatever, I'll put in a little graphic or a GIF or something like that. Excuse me, a GIF. I'll put it in there, and I'll use the platform for that. So you wind up watching it more there. Then you've got to create the caption, and then there's the last kind of preview. So there's just there's a lot. There's
enormous amount of effort per short.
Yeah, be prepared to do work.
And do you ever use people for any of those steps?
I don't. I know I should, and I encourage a lot of my customers, a lot of my clients, a lot of my students. You can get great support. There's wonderful things like Upwork, where you can build teams of people, using both locally as well as international people to help you create. And there's amazing people out there. For me, one of the big reasons I've resisted it is because the story, and I'm so big on stories, the story is in the editing, right? Like that's the heart of it is the story I'm telling. And if I'm not there telling that story, then it's not me creating the content. I lose control of it. At some point, I'm sure I will be able to step away. But that's the storytelling.
So as we've described it, it's a full-time job.
Yes. 100%. Okay. But sorry, and just because in case any of my students are listening that I'm yelling at and mad at, I managed to put out a video just about every day, and I do that while teaching multiple courses, while publishing, while advising students and being on committees and all those things, all the professional jobs, running a consulting firm with a roster of clients. Pay me a lot of money to make sure I'm there for them and looking at their content and giving feedback, and being a full-time dad with two wonderful little girls that I love. And I try to be at their dance practices, and I'm driving them around and chauffeuring them. And I still put out a piece of content every day. So you, dang student who, thinks you're so busy, like, why can't you put out a piece of content every day? Or you listening to this, who's got a full-time PM job, like, yeah, you can do it all. You just got to be efficient. You got to be thoughtful.
So one of the controversial things I think about short form video, but I think more people should probably consider is copying, which is like basically copying the topic, the format, the hook of somebody, but then giving your own spin because you're reshooting it and saying it yourself. What do you think about that?
I'm going to touch the third rail of academia, which is plagiarism. The big bad P word. But let me give us a kind of a better word for it. I'll get to that better word for it and a better way of thinking of it than copying it. So, plagiarism is a really interesting concept in academia, because plagiarism is a byproduct of, intellectual property, which came as a byproduct of the modern university and the French Enlightenment. So the French Enlightenment, basically, this is, now we've got industrialization is happening. We've got all these kind of machines and processes allowing the world to scale its outputs. And so finally, humans start to have this opportunity to do things like sit around and think for a living. Because before, there just wasn't as much time to sit around and think for it, because you had to, food. I couldn't just walk to the store and get all my food. So this starts to happen, and these people who are thinking for a living need to find a way to show that they're creating value. And so that's where these idea of intellectual property comes from. It's like, oh, your thoughts are valuable. Now let's put all these kind of legal codification and framework around it. This is all relatively new, right? French Enlightenment, we're talking about the 1800s, right? So relatively new in human history. Before that, the way you learned an artistic process was by copying. Right? Copying was the fundamental. That's why you talk about the workshops of famous painters. That's what you did. You sat around and you said, okay, let me learn how to do this by copying other people doing this. And by the way, it's also important. And oh my gosh, I'm gonna anger the arts people out there again when I always say this, because artists, the myth of the starving artist, I create great art for myself and other people just don't understand, right? That is a wildly new modern convention. Historically, art was artisans. It was a profession. It was a job. It's okay to make money doing art, people. You don't have to be a starving artist. You can cater to what audiences want. You don't have to, they just don't understand. They don't get that. No, historically, that's never what art's been. So again, artisans were craftspeople, a form of craftspeople. They were unionized, and they would go out and they would create by copying, and that was how you scaled artistic production. Is you had a studio and said, "Cool, here's how I would do it. I want you to get really good at copying me, so that I can do more of it, and we can carve more gargoyles on this chapel that they all look the same or whatever it is." So copying is not a bad thing. It's actually the fun. It's how we learn. It's how we get better at a craft. And then the greatest artists are the ones who are able to take that, who learn through copying, learn through imitation, through mimicry, and then they're able to put unique spins that push the medium forward. And so the phrase I prefer instead of copying is verticalizing, trend verticalization. Verticalizing trends is about taking what other people are doing and then advancing that trend forward by putting it into your niche. And by the way, for the most famous artist in human history, this is exactly what he did. William Shakespeare, trend verticalizer. If you think about Romeo and Juliet, he didn't come up with Romeo and Juliet, Romulus and Julieta. That was a famous story for hundreds of years. He takes it and he verticalizes it to theater and Elizabethan audience. That's what he does. Macbeth, Hamlet. These are all stories that had existed for a long, long time, and he verticalized them. So it's not copying, it's verticalizing trends. You should absolutely be online all the time, looking at what other people are doing, studying it, going, ooh, that's effective. Here's why that's effective. Now let me take that and let me put my spin on it into my niche and put it out there in the world.
Yeah, I think more people just have to be willing to do that, especially early on when we're talking about your first 100 videos. You'll eventually develop your own style as you critique your own work, but get inspired by what's working. And I think even within your own niche, go look at, there's basically only 3 or 4 people who can do short form video and product management right now. Go look at all of their videos, figure out what you think is making them tick. One of the guys, he does the cuts that we mentioned super well, but they're all at his desk, surprisingly. So he's just taking 60 different angles of 1-second shots of him at his desk. And then he does a voiceover. This is how I'm preparing for my interview coming up. So you should try that. You should do that. And you should figure out, okay, this video did work. It didn't work, but the cuts part of it really did help my performance. It performed 30% better than my last video. So I'm going to keep that element. And that's how you'll eventually create your own style.
Yeah. Style is something that you develop over time. I've started to develop much more of a style that is my doctorate in style, but it's through looking at other people's content. And and people are so worried. They're like, oh, people think I'm copying. Have you ever looked at a video on Instagram and thought, oh, this guy's clearly copying this other person? Why are we? It's that there's a term for it, the spotlight effect. We think people pay much more attention to us because we live in our own heads than anyone ever does. And by the way, for proof of this, just start actually looking into other people's cars while you're driving down the road. You know how many people are picking their nose in their car? It's wild. We never really notice it. And we drive down the road. We probably pick our own nose to drive down the road because like we're in our own little world and we imagine like no one's able to see us or look around. And the truth is no one really is looking around and looking at you. And here's the test I always do with us. So again, a lot of my athletes especially are very self-conscious about putting out content. And I always have to, because they think everyone's going to remember it and judge them. And I have to remind them, like, tell me, what was the last, tell me, describe the last TikTok video you watched. And everyone's face goes blank. Nobody can remember. They spent 3 hours right before the conversation you just had, and they can't tell you the last TikTok they just watched. So what in the world makes you think that people are going to look at your content and remember every second of it and be like, how dare this person put up a second video today? Oh my gosh, he's flooding my feed. You should be so lucky. But anyone who worries about like, oh, I don't want to flood people's feeds. The goal is to be seen. Do you know how hard it is to get into someone's feed more than once in a day without them like actively going to it's super hard. That's gold. It's wild.
Yeah. So I want to get some video specific advice. So I want to go platform by platform. So let's start with LinkedIn because I think this is actually one where copying, because we were talking about copying, don't copy text, guys. I know many of you, I'm looking at the camera, like to copy my posts, which is, I do notice because it's text. I think like with text and with ideas, it's a little different than with video and imagery. On the topic of short form video on LinkedIn, like I think we have like roughly like a 50x difference in followers on LinkedIn, but your videos on LinkedIn probably do 50x better than mine. So I haven't learned anything about LinkedIn video like you have. What makes a LinkedIn video work?
So here I'm just going to have to demur and say I don't really know yet. LinkedIn is not my core platform by any means, and I've had some wild successes on LinkedIn with video recently, and millions of views on them. That has been crazy, and I think what it is, it's less about we're less at a point of being able to say here's what works on LinkedIn, and more we're at a point in the platform where LinkedIn is finally getting around to prioritizing video. And you can actually see it. They've now got like a kind of a TikTok style, like you open a video, it takes up the full screen and you can be like scrolling through it thing. And so they're just trying to get people to use that. And so what they're doing right now is they're what they call giving away traffic. And they're giving away traffic to people who are willing to put videos up, and honestly, videos that are more short formy, Instagram-y style videos, which is what I do well. And so I think it's more a right time, right place, right time to have some of those pop off, and not because I'm sitting down saying, here's what works on LinkedIn. I don't think anyone knows yet.
Okay, but I think there is a theme to your LinkedIn videos. So I analyzed them pretty closely last night. They tend to be about trending tech topics, going back to Kairos. They tend to have a lot of cuts. Like you tend to be in the real world. I think the problem with most people creating LinkedIn video like me is like they're floating heads, or at best they're like in-person podcast versus you're out there in the real world. And then the third thing is I find that you have a lot of, I forget which one this is. This might be Pathos. You have a F ton of information still packed in there. Like with the NVIDIA video, you're talking about how they've gained $2 trillion in market cap. They have a full service bar. They're driving Teslas. There's so much information. Like it's like a nonstop stream.
You might be right. As I think about what, so LinkedIn is the platform where people are more willing to admit they're there to learn. Whereas even though you're learning on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, people don't think of it as learning. It's interesting. It's when it's fun, nobody thinks of it as learning. Like here's how to cook something, or here's how to style your hair. It was like, ooh, I'm learning things. And they're like, oh, I'm being entertained. I'm enjoying it. But as soon as you take it to, hey, let me talk about this professional thing that's going to make you better at your job. You're like, okay, I'm learning. This is a class. And so LinkedIn is a platform where people are kind of more prepared to learn. And so I have noticed that the content does better. So I have a wonderful client. She's had some wonderful success on LinkedIn recently. And we found that her talking head videos aren't the ones doing as well as you're right, as some 2-character, 1 light bulb kind of content, or some more of the skit content. And so again, this is where I think LinkedIn, what you have to remember is that the people who are, this is weird to say, but I'm gonna say it like this and see if I can back into it. People die. we'll get to this. So right, this is like the natural aging process, right? New generations replace old generations. And so we're seeing new generations replace old generations, even on platforms like LinkedIn. And so you've got people who have grown up with Instagram and TikTok and whatnot going into the professional world. And so what are they going to want to see on LinkedIn? Well, they're going to want to see what they were used to in their TikTok world before, but professionals doing it.
Yeah. So the platform you've cracked like no other that I want to crack is Instagram. And I don't know if there's any really successful PM accounts. So just generically on Instagram, like what is working for you to grow your Instagram? And I think as a result, you've also grown your threads really fast too. So what is working there?
So let's try to understand kind of TikTok versus Instagram. And it's important to also note that when we talk about Instagram, most professionals in the kind of the marketing world think of Instagram as now 3 platforms, right? It's the feed, the traditional Instagram feed. It's stories, which is more your Snapchat-y style stuff. And then it is Reels. And they're functionally just 3 totally different products, even though it's all Instagram. And so most of my work, as we even alluded to before, is Reels, which is functionally TikTok. But over on the kind of the Instagram version of TikTok. So I always like to think about them in relation to each other. So what TikTok does is the way you have to understand the algorithm. And so the way TikTok's algorithm works is it's interested in getting people on the app watching for as long as possible. And so the way it does it is you upload a piece of content and TikTok has all this data about every user. They get just enormous amounts of data from your watching habits. I also call it the For You page on TikTok is a truth serum. And so it's fun to steal people's phones. It's never fun to steal people's phones, but it's fun to steal people's phones and like open their TikTok and look at their For You page because you learn a lot about them because even if you don't like something or comment something or share something, if you watch it 3 times, TikTok saw that you watched it 3 times. And so it's always funny to hear, especially older people will be like, I don't know why anyone uses TikTok. Every time I go on there, it's just, high schoolers dancing in skimpy outfits. They're like, well, no, that you just told me what you're looking at though, because TikTok figured out that that's what you watch when you go on there. And so it keeps showing them to you. Thanks for that insight into your life. And so what TikTok, and I will get back to answering your question about Instagram, but it's important that we understand the difference because that understands how to crack Instagram. So what TikTok does is, you download TikTok for the first time and you watch a piece of content, and that content, it's trying to learn about you and what your viewing habits are because they want you to just watch as long as possible. And so you watch that piece of content and then it tells you how to go to the next piece of content. And you learn, if I swipe up, I get to the next content. Okay. And so you start to watch the next one. I don't like it. I swipe immediately. Oh, TikTok just learned something about you. So it's going to show you something totally different than what it just showed you. Or you watched all the way through. Okay, I learned something about you. Let me show you something similar. See if you watched all the way through again. Anyway, your viewing habit and every time you swipe and is teaching TikTok what you want. And its goal is to get you to watch without ever having to move a finger. You're just happy to sit there and watch. It's the perfect TV channel. And so in order to do that, the content that's successful on TikTok is content that is more generic. So it doesn't matter who the creator is, it matters who the audience is. And so I think a good example of this is, I'll have athletes and who are used to Instagram, their content does well, but it doesn't do well on TikTok. And they get really frustrated that they can't grow on TikTok. Don't they know who I am? And it's like, well, no, they don't know who you are because there are over 1 billion users on this platform, and TikTok shows your content to 200 to 300 people. And the chances of those 200 to 300 people actually knowing who you are basically zero, even if you are a successful athlete.
Okay.
And so what you have to do is it's called engaging without content. Engaging without context. EWOC is the initialism there, right? Or that's an acronym, right? Initialism, acronym. I get this confused. So that's an acronym. EWOC is an acronym. I get annoyed when people mix up and they call an initialism an acronym because in an acronym it has to be a word, a pronounceable word.
Oh, okay. So it's an initialism, EWOC,
initialism.
Right?
So EWOC would be a word. I think that's a word. I think that counts.
Oh, okay.
Right. But whereas like, I don't know why this keeps getting PPV, pay-per-view. Yeah. That's an initialism. That's not an acronym. Mm-hmm. But people will call that an acronym. Anyway. So EWOC, engaging without context. that for the chances of that person knowing you when they pull up, see your video on TikTok is tiny, especially that first 200, 300 people that TikTok shows your video to. And what TikTok's doing is it's looking for signals that people like this video. And if of those 200 to 300 random people it shows it to, and by the way, as it knows you as a creator more, it knows, oh, people tend to like people who look like this, or categorize it, tend to like this person's content. This person must make content like this. By the way, TikTok's AI is great. It knows if you have a coffee mug in your video. It can tell you have a coffee mug, right? It can read your video. And so it tries to show it to people it thinks is going to like it. Now, based on how much they watch of your video, whether they share it, they like it, they comment, TikTok decides, oh, this is a good piece of content, or oh, it's not. If not enough people comment and engage with it, it just dies. And so that's why you see so many dead videos with 200 to 300 views. But then if some people seem to like it, it's got good kind of conversion rates, it'll show it to another 200, 300 people. Like, oh, okay. Those people are like, okay, let's show it to 1,000 more people. Oh, these people that look like this seem to still like it. Let's show it to people who look slightly like that, but just like with a little difference over here. And then more and more. And suddenly if you have a video that just wildly pops on TikTok, you're like refreshing every 5 seconds and another 50,000 people have seen it. You're like, holy cow. But there's billions of people on the platform, and that's how it works. So generic content, when I say generic, does better on TikTok because by definition, the content has to be more broadly appealing. It's not necessarily going to show it to your followers. TikTok doesn't care as much about your followers. That I probably could have just started with. TikTok doesn't care about your followers. That's the short version of everything I just said. Instagram cares more about your followers. So it still has this kind of let's show it to general people, but it's also going to show it to your followers. And so to grow the difference, and why I'll cross post Instagram videos and TikTok, and I'll have videos that do 5 million views on Instagram and 500 views on TikTok. It's wild, but it's because fundamentally Instagram is going, hey, let's show it to your followers. And knowing that it's for my followers, I get a sense of what they want. I get that they know me a little more. Yep. I can be a little more engaging, understanding that they have context to who I am and why I'm doing it. So as you start to build following on Instagram, you can start to lean more into the fact that people do know you, do care about you, are following you for a reason. So that's the big difference in the growth strategy on Instagram is different. You can actually lean into more of who you are. Whereas on TikTok, it's much more about being broad.
So we just spent almost 2 hours on short form video. I think people are going to be way more equipped to do short form video. Now I want to switch to Medium, which is another platform that you've definitely cracked. I've seen very few people, like you consistently post with like hundreds, thousands of claps for each post. Talk to us a little bit about what's working on Medium today and why.
So Medium was my baby. That was my first platform. I'm much more proud. So even though I have about 200,000 followers on Instagram and only 100,000 on Medium, like 100,000 on Medium is like 1 million on any other platform. I'm always a little disappointed too that like that. Like why did I start there? I should have started somewhere else where I could have a bigger number. Anyway, I love Medium because ultimately, again, literature guy, like PhD in English. I love writing. And so it kind of appealed to me really early on as the platform. Medium has really changed a lot in the 5-ish years, I guess I've been using it. It was much more open, a much kind of bigger, kind of broad community that was not nearly as a much more superficial community. So there's just a lot more people using Medium, I think 5 years ago, but the value of those audiences was a lot smaller. Now I think I get the sense, I don't have any inside information just from like my metrics and stuff. I have significantly less views on posts, and most successful Medium creators have significantly less views than they used to get on posts, but the quality of the engagement and the people following you and reading your content is much, much bigger. So I think it's a smaller community that cares a lot more. And so you've got to, as you're creating content on Medium, it's about creating real value. And so let's go back to that word value. And people, I came across this thread the other day where someone was like, I don't get how Mediums work. I've posted 60 articles on Medium in the past month. And I'm not, I'm only getting like 5 views per article. Like, oh my gosh, 60 articles in a month on Medium is bananas. And so what she's doing, she's clearly just spamming it. Yeah. And by the way, thanks to AI, anyone can post 60 articles a month. You probably post 600 articles on a month in Medium. But if they're not meaningful articles that are creating real value for your audience, which is what you're going to get if you're trying to put 60 on there in a month, then you're not going to grow. So, okay, so what is meaningful value on Medium? Well, I live in a niche on Medium. I live in this kind of entrepreneur startup tech space niche, which is luckily one of the larger niches and communities on Medium, because that's, it's kind of a Silicon Valley darling in its earlier days. But there's a bunch of different niches. So, you want to basically, you definitely want to kind of go into your niche, lean into your niche that works there.
Yep.
And then again, storytelling is the key, because the thing AI doesn't do particularly well is tell stories.
It doesn't have real stories.
It doesn't have stories to tell. So really over the past, especially, year, 2 years, as AI has become increasingly kind of the way people are creating content, the stuff that's bubbling up on Medium is the ones that have humanity in them, that have errors in them. I know it's weird to say it, but ChatGPT doesn't make it. Like, it doesn't have spelling errors. And there's something very human about seeing a spelling error that makes you go, oh, I bet like a real person would have written this, because it's got a spelling error in it, which is weird to think about. But the way to I'm not saying everyone should go put spelling errors in their Medium posts now. But what I am saying is, put humanity into your content. And my content has very much moved to more and more personal stories, more and more humanity. And again, part of that is also the advantage that I'm one of the bigger writers there. So I do have a following, and people do know me. And so I'm able to talk more about myself and what I'm doing and put myself into my stories more. It'd be harder to do that if I'm starting from scratch. But again, humanity, make people feel like there's a person creating this content.
Yeah. So I read a bunch of your Medium articles last night. Every single one starts with a story. And usually that's what's like free too, above the paywall. So you have like a hook, which usually you don't even address in the free set part. It's like, like 3 paragraphs. That's like a story. Like, I was judging this competition. Here's what I learned. But the title is like, what you must do to win a pitch competition. But you haven't told us that yet, right? You've just explained the start of the story.
So and that story is, so if you notice that the structure of the story is, to hint at what the core problem is.
Yeah.
Right. And so I introduce the problem in the story, and then I discuss how to deal with or solve or, handle the problem in the article. Mm-hmm. Right? So the problem is the story is introduce the problem. The article deals with the problem.
What's your process for writing a Medium article?
Process for writing a Medium article is actually, I think, very similar to that creator mindset and that content is, I'm looking for stories. I'm looking for opportunities. So even out of our conversation here, there's been a few things that we've discussed or talked about that I'm like, oh, there's probably a good article in there. So I've gotten just part of my mind now works of like, as I'm going about my life in the world, I'm looking for the interesting entrepreneurial lesson that we can teach here. Or I just came from before this, I had a meeting with someone who's she's moving up in her career, and it's interesting. She's hiring her first people, and she was talking about just like how different it is to like the struggles of managing and like, hey, that's the thing every entrepreneur experiences. When you start out, you're building your company, you're rolling up your sleeves, you're doing the coding, you're doing the sales, and then you grow and you think like the solution to everything is hire, and then you hire people and you realize, oh my gosh, my job has totally shifted, and now I'm actually spend most of my time managing people, and it's totally different work.
Yeah.
And it's work I sucked at, by the way. One of my Achilles heels as an entrepreneur was being a manager. I'm not good at managing other people because I like to be doing the stuff. This, by the way, is also why lots of entrepreneurs get kicked out of their company. CEOs get kicked out or eventually leave their company, but because the thing they're good at is totally different than leading a public company, right? That's a totally different skill set. And so anyway, I had this conversation with this woman, and I was immediately like, oh yeah, this is definitely going to be an article about, again, the struggles of management. And luckily, again, I'm in a position where I have lots of students. I always have students coming to me with questions. I always have office hours. I'm meeting students. I have lunch with my students. I'm teaching lessons in class, and they're asking questions. And so I've just gotten really good at filing. Like, oh, that's an article right there. Answering that question is an article. And so what I would encourage people to do if they're interested in starting to create more long form content is go about your day and look for, learn to look for the problems people are trying to get answered that you're helping to answer. File them away, write them down. I write everything. I keep Trello is my notebook. Mm-hmm. I just have giant Trello boards of idea topics. And so I've got all those, and so I always make a note. You will never remember. This is another thing I always tell my students and my clients. Do not expect that you're just going to remember your brilliant idea. Always write it down immediately. You will never remember your brilliant idea. And so always write it down as soon as you have it. So again, I'm in that mode where even if I'm falling asleep in bed, I'm like, oh no, I gotta write it down. I gotta write it down because you will not remember it in the morning. Always write it down. I'm in the shower. I'll hop out of the shower, write it down. Always write it down, and then I come back and I again go through those ideas. And then once I've got that idea, when I write it down, I put the story, and so then I start my Medium article with the story. Here's kind of what happened to tell that context, and then then the rest of it just like, well, here's what I would have told that person. Or here's what I did in that moment, or here's how it ended. And then usually it ends with some sort of kind of you want to articulate the lesson as clearly as possible. To make sure that people know what the core lesson is. And I always like to end with some sort of, I think one of my skills is I'm good at ending with something interesting or inspiring or an interesting question or something that I'm good at tying a bow at the end of my articles. And bringing it back to like that thing in the beginning that maybe you didn't even realize was like the a fun thing to bring it back to.
Yeah. So really the creator lifestyle of structuring your life to have stories. You're not just at a computer all day filming videos and then writing articles. You have other stuff that you can write about. I think that's super important. Second thing is you had a really interesting process for taking what might be the seedling of an article and accelerating your process to write it. Can you share? So I think it was something along the lines of while you're driving to work, you're narrating to like ChatGPT or something like that, so it can create your first draft.
So what I use is I've really gotten really invested in ChatGPT's voice automation, and so what you can do is you can pull up chat if you haven't done this yet, like pay for the subscription and get it so you can talk to ChatGPT. And so as I'm driving, I like to banter back and forth with, so if I take that story or whatever it is I had, I might chat to, I might put that story into ChatGPT and say, okay, give me, and I will, basically what I've started doing is I do much more stream of consciousness. So I've gone back and I've done word counts just out of curiosity. And so what I would do is rather than sit down and try to write that fully polished article and get it just right, I found I can go quicker if I go into ChatGPT and either as I'm talking, and I just stream of conscious, narrate what happened and my thoughts around it and the interesting lesson, or I'll sit down and I'll type it all out. And by the way, some of those, like the word count of those is like longer than the article. And what ChatGPT does really well is it's able to take that and turn it into a much more polished draft that then I can go back in and like I never wind up like that draft is not good in terms of like, oh, yep, let me hit publish on it. But it's like, oh, okay, here's everything I just said now in paragraph form that's structured. And now let me go clean the heck out of that to put it into my own words and create the thing that I would have said. But everyone knows that it's a lot easier to start from. So I think you said it when we chatted last time too. Is what was the phrase? It's really hard to start from a blank page. It's much easier to start from a page that has something and edit. And so what you've got is going on in your life already. So if I'm a PM, I'm just imagining a PM's life. I'm getting very depressed. And okay, I'm back. So PM's life, you're going through, you're trying to corral all these different people. You're trying to kind of tech people and the marketing people, the comms, you're trying to put them all, and you have no authority and power over them, but you're trying to run these meetings to get people on the same page, right? That's how I just described PM life. Cool. Yeah. So I figured. So you're doing this, and so you're spending all your days in these meetings with people, and throughout those meetings, you're going to have these interesting conversations or events. Or like I was trying to get the programmer to stop caring so much about like number of coding it in Python when it's already in. We don't need to rebuild it. It was in PHP, and that's fine. How do we blah blah blah? And so take that story now, go tell that story to ChatGPT. And just describe what happened. I met with my colleague, Frank. We went into this and get into as much detail as you want or as little detail. Again, the AI just doesn't care. In fact, it helps it. And give that and just tell that story of what happened and then say, and I think the important lesson here was something about, how developers tend to get too focused on, optimizing, premature optimization before we even know whether or not something works. And so that's the theme of the story. And then ChatGPT will spit you out like basically everything you said to it, but cleaned up in less rambly ways. Like I could probably put this answer into ChatGPT. It would give you the less rambly version of this answer. And I'm like, cool, that's everything I meant to say. It's more articulate, because I wasn't doing it on the spot. And then now let me go clean it and put it into my language.
Okay. Yeah. The way I like to use ChatGPT for my writing content too is like, what I try to do is I try to do the first 20%, which is like figuring out all the original takes and ideas. Like I'm writing about product management. There's only so much you can write about. So all my original takes, I usually put that into like a pretty deep outline. Like my article is like 10,000 words. So I'll do like, like 800 to 1,000 words. And then ChatGPT will take me from 20 to 80% really fast, right? And then I can do the other 20% to make the writing my own, make it really mine.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to use it too. I think just in general, people need to understand is that ChatGPT it's so much, it's so freaking tolerant of garbage.
Yeah.
And so what so in the past when I was writing articles, I have to get the polished article like from my head onto the paper. And that just takes a really long time. And what you just described, same thing is like, well, no, now I can just get the garbage version of that article on the paper. And actually I used to do this a lot. So when I go back to my original writing process, when I first figured out Medium and really how to kind of get good at it and be putting out articles regularly, what I did is I sat down and I would try to brain dump an article as quickly as possible. Instead of time, I learned it was waiting outside my door. Like I knew I had an hour. And I would come hell or high water, I would have an article on that page in an hour, just brain dumped. It would be freaking terrible. And then I would go back to it a week later, maybe I had a week in advance or something. So I had a runway where I was putting out articles. And I go back to it a week later. And instead of starting from an empty page, now is at least starting from something that was, but like roughly what I wanted to get to. And then I could edit, and that was so much easier. So it took my writing time from trying to put it perfectly on the page the first time, and it would take like 6, 7, 8 hours to, okay, hour for the crappy version. And then now I'm editing for another hour, 2 hours to get to the good version. And so what ChatGPT has done really well is now I just brain dump really crappily. So it's just like, here's what happened. And I can even speak it as I'm driving. And then it gives me the crappy version. And then my next hour is, okay, let me make this the good version, which is kind of what you described, right? It's like it gets you to the, you've got the core, you've got the important, the original thought, and it takes the original thought and turns it into something that you can then edit to you.
Yeah. So you had a viral Threads post talking about another medium where you said, I've started telling my students I expect them to use AI on all their essays. At first, they're excited. Then I remind them that since they're using AI, my grading standards are much higher. I love this. Say more.
So it's the fun. And anytime I post about AI, that content always does well. It's about AI in a classroom because people get, oh, this is the end of critical thinking. And it's just people who haven't used AI. It's like, these are not magical tools that just do the work for you. Instead, in the core of that post, I think one of my responses to someone else in that post who was lamenting the end of critical thinking, I was like, no. In order to create great content using AI, you still have to do the hard work, which is know what great content looks like. That's the hard part. The hard part isn't dumping words onto a page. It can take time. People always confuse when I say like, difficult and easy are different than takes a long time, or fast or slow.
Yeah.
Right. And there can be really hard things that are quick and really easy things that take a long time. Right. Like I can binge watch all of Game of Thrones. That's really easy to do. It's just going to take a long time.
Yeah.
Right. And so let's not conflate quick with easy or slow with difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And so the hard part about creating great content is knowing what great content looks like. And so what AI does really well is it helps you get there. It helps you do some of the things that just take a long time quicker, but you still got to know what good is. So my approach in the classroom, and so what I meant by that post is, so my students are excited. First of all, people misinterpreted it. They said, I said, I expect them to be using AI. They interpret it as I make them use AI. And that's not what I said. I expect that they're using it. And so I'm going to grade them accordingly. And so I know if it's, you should never have a typo in the paper that you submit, student. Why? Because in order to get typos removed, all you have to do is upload into ChatGPT and say, hey, can you correct any typos or grammar mistakes in here? Mm-hmm. And ChatGPT in 10 seconds will tell you every one of them. So if you give me a paper with a typo, It just means you didn't spend the extra 30 seconds it would have taken you to done that. And that, thanks to AI, is inexcusable. Right? I would excuse it before because I get it. Like, and I have typos in some of the things I do. And if I'm handwriting, like you're trying to get someone else to read it and other people make them.
Yeah.
There's no excuse for that. So I'm not going to accept that as an excuse in your, in this thing you're submitting. And then also I'm going to expect that like you've used AI to iterate, to help you come up with different ideas for what you could write about. So my expectations are going to be different in terms of, even if you're an ESL student, English in your primary language, well, cool. You can brain dump a kind of a poorly written thing into it and then have ChatGPT help you turn that into something that reads, that reads as though you're a native speaker, because that's what it does really well, right? So I'm going to now grade you knowing what AI does well and what it doesn't do well. So that's what I meant by that.
Yeah, people always look at, like, I remember the calculator, the word processor. They're like, these tools, they're going to remove critical thinking. But really, like, the people who get ahead, like, they figured out how to use the calculator to do better math, but they didn't lose the ability to do math. Same with the word processor. It's like people probably have the wrong fear, I feel, about AI.
And it's, it's so we can almost like go full circle here. We got a nice full circle moment. It's, if you go back in time to the invention of written language, right? Because originally language was only oral, it wasn't written down, there was no alphabets. And so if you go back to written language, you can actually find it's like Plato's dialogues of him basically lecturing, scolding his students for writing stuff down and always reading stuff instead of memorizing it. And written language and reading stuff is going to ruin the world. And now we're like, oh, my daughter's reading books instead of on social media. That's great. So now reading is this glorified thing. And so this is just this is the natural cycle of humanity is we, you grow up knowing what you know, the technologies that you have that you're comfortable with, and new technologies are always coming along and you don't adapt to them, but the next generation does, because to them it's just normal. And so you as the older generation go, oh, that's ruining the world. But the next generation doesn't know any different. And then the older generation dies and the next generation becomes the dominant generation. And it's just normal. And then there's another generation after them. And that's just the circle of life. Yay, circle of life. I would equate not using AI in a classroom to saying, you can't use a calculator. Like, how stupid is that? Instead, and here's what my dissertation, going way back from when I was doing that, but it was all about this idea that the point at which a technology fails is the point at which an art begins. What we have to understand is, every technology has a limitation, and the great artists, the great deployers of that technology. When I say artist, I don't mean the people sitting around having brilliant thoughts that nobody wants to pay for or cares about because they just don't understand. I mean, artisans. What they do is they're able to push a technology beyond its structural limitations in order for it to do more. And so that's what poetry is, right? We read poetry in a modern context. Like, why would anyone read this? This is a waste of time. It's boring to most people. Even myself, again, who loves poetry, I don't read poetry. But historically, you have to remember that there was no video. How would you send someone how would you convey a moving image to someone? All you had was language. Well, you had to create dynamic language, and poetry is wildly dynamic language. It's infinitely interpretable. So what happens is it allows people to read that in different ways and creates motion in language. It is taking the technology, which is language, which is fixed, and then gives it dynamism and interpretability that allows it for it to be a dynamic image in someone's mind. So that's taking the technology, the point at which the technology fails, and moving beyond it. That's where the art begins. And so again, AI is this technology we're using, and the greatest people leveraging it aren't people who are going to be like, oh, we shouldn't use this. They're going to be ones who say, cool, here's the limitations of this technology. Exactly what you described. This is why I call you an artist of the technology. Saying, cool, the limitation of this technology is it can't just write the article for me. But what it can do is if I take the core initial thought, give it to that, it's going to get me to this kind of 80% way, and then I'm going to craft that into the full impact of this lesson I want to teach. And you're an artist.
Tired of spending your days and nights managing all your paperwork processes with multiple tools? Good news. Today's podcast partner, Anvil, is a document AI that helps you build software for your paperwork processes at ludicrous speed. Turn your PDFs into templates in seconds. Anvil Document AI identifies input fields, assigns labels, and even prepares your document for signature. What if you could transform your templates into web forms in the blink of an eye and embed them into your application for a seamless user experience? The best part? Anvil separates your structured data from your PDFs so you can power your business with data, not documents, making it fully operational. The next time you're stuck processing PDFs, creating web forms, or gathering e-signatures, remember you can do it faster with Anvil Document AI. So visit anvil.com/Aakash. That's USEANVIL.com/AAKASH. Don't get PDF'd.
So we've gone through basically a masterclass on social media, a little microcosm of the course that you teach your students. And one of the things that I think is like kind of a universal principle across all these different social media platforms that we talked about is being a character. And you gave a really interesting anecdote about Prof G and how he's a character. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So, I love thinking about social media this way is when you're building an audience, a personal audience on social media and personal brand around yourself, the best way I think to think about it is to think of yourself as creating a character. And we're very familiar with this in other media, right? So, if you see Ben Affleck dressed as a bat, you don't think, oh, Ben Affleck must think he's a bat, right? Oh, he's playing a character in a movie. But for some reason, we see someone on social media, whether it's Donald Trump or Taylor Swift, and we go, oh, that's the real person. It's not the person. They're playing a character. A caricature might even be a better way to describe it on social media. And you can actually get this by, you can read interviews with people who, and again, I'm not trying to get political here, people who hate Donald Trump, think he is the worst thing that's ever happened to the world. And there's plenty of those people out there, right? And they'll meet him in person. And one of the first things they'll say is, wow, he's not at all like what I thought he was going to be. I'm not saying they like him or dislike. I'm just saying he's not what they expected, because what they're used to is the character of Donald Trump, who's leveraging social media and the way you get eyeballs on social media. And as we talked about earlier, pathos, creating anger, creating animosity is a great way of building audience on social media. I'm not saying great as a value judgment. I think it's a terrible way as a value judgment, but it is an effective way to build audience on social media, is to create outrage and mistrust and rage. And Donald Trump does that. That's what he does incredibly well. And so that's the character he's playing on social media. And so, and this comes from the lineage of social media. When social media first comes out there, we got, not that Facebook was by any means the first social media platform, but kind of Facebook is your first kind of globally really big one, right? And so you're on there, and your best friend's on there, and your grandma's on there, and so we start to just kind of understand these platforms as like, oh, that must be the real person. But it becomes weird when we start to get Instagram, and suddenly we're following our best friend and our grandma and Oprah, and so we think like, oh well, Oprah, it just must be who she is because she's right next to my grandma and I know that's my grandma. And we forget that, no, Oprah is playing a character. What it is, it's called a parasocial relationship. So it's a one-sided relationship. You feel like you know the person, but the other person has no idea who you are. And that's what celebrity is. It's a parasocial relationship. And so when you're building it on, once you get beyond your immediate social circle on social media, then what you're doing is you're creating a parasocial relationship. So you are, by definition, a character. The people who are following you don't know the real you. They know this kind of character version of you, and you should embrace that. Now, when I say character, I want to be really clear, and not that you can't do it this way, but the way I approach character and the way I advocate for character, I'm not saying you should be fake, or that it's not you, that you're pretending to be something you aren't. I like to say, I call my character, my character is Dr. Dinnan. I'm Aaron Dinnan. You're talking to Aaron Dinnan right now, but my social media character is Dr. Dinnan. And Dr. Dinnan is the version of me I wish I was all the time. He's not someone I'm pretending to be. He is the best version of me. And I warn my students about this because I got lots of students now taking my class because they've seen all my social media content. And what I mean by this is you just saw the 60-second video of me where I haven't said if we count the number of times I said and like in this recording, I will probably gouge my eyes out. because that's something I do. But guess what? I bet an editor is going to come through here and get rid of a lot of those and make me sound a lot smarter than I am. And I thank you, editor, whoever you are. So in my social media content, you're going to get that 60-second version. I'm going to be witty. I'm going to be charming. I'm funny. I'm going to get straight to the point. As you've heard here, I don't always get straight to the point. But in that 60-second version, I am. But now you're going to come take a class with me. And you're going to be sitting in my classroom for an hour and 15 minutes, 2 times a week. And in that hour and 15 minutes, I'm going to stutter over my words. I'm not going to get to the point. I'm going to have a lesson that bombs. I'm going to not be dressed as maybe well as it was, or I'm going to be sick or raspy. I'm going to be imperfect and flawed, just like we all are. And so Dr. Dinnan is the character. It's the best version of me. It's the one who always says the right thing, who it gives the right message, gets to the point quickly. And so that's how I think it's a great way to approach your social media presence. It's not you, it's the best version of you. It's the character of you. And this also does some really important things that are worth noting just logistically for a creator who's trying to expand and grow. Number one, a character version of you gives you some distance from who you are or what you're putting out there. And that becomes important because I'll give you an example. Like the Aaron Dinnan sitting in front of you on this podcast would never dance on social media. Like he would be terrified. He's not a good dancer into it. But would Dr. Dinnan, if he happened to have like the dance team in his class dance on social media? Yeah, he kind of would. And so I've got videos of Dr. Dinnan dance. Like I would never dance, but like it's like, oh no, it's okay because it's Dr. Dinnan doing it, and that's the character would do that. And so it kind of gives you permission to maybe do things that you wouldn't have otherwise done because you would have just been uncomfortable. So I think that's a really valuable way of thinking. Like, no, the character would do that, so the character is going to do it, and it lets you separate it from your personal, your friends and family watching the content. So that's one really valuable thing. Second really valuable thing about creating a character is that it allows you to simplify. Your social media presence is a much more simplified version of you. And by that, I mean, like anyone listening to this, you are a very complex human being. And very complex human beings, feel different ways about different things. They have good days, they have bad days, they yell at their kids, they stub their toe, whatever it is. And but the internet doesn't have time, but you don't have time to put that complexity in a 60-second video. And so it allows you to boil down to the core way you can create value into the world. So again, as we talked about earlier, I want to make sure I'm creating value for my audience, and me having a bad day and being in a fight with my child shouldn't be something that you have to deal with in the 60-second Instagram video I give you. And so it simplifies it to make me less complex and give you the value that I'm there to give you. The third big thing about creating a character is it lets you evolve as a person. Now, this comes from, I'm aware there's this wonderful line, I'm stealing it from the West Wing, but I love the line, is I'm aware that I'm currently writing the first line of my obituary. Right. So when I die, people say, Aaron Dinnan, beloved Duke professor, right? Like that's going to be how it starts. So I'm well set into my career. And so 10, 15, 20 years from now, if I'm still creating content, God willing, it's still going to be this person that you're seeing right here functionally. A lot of the creators I work with are students, and you are very different when you're 15 years old to when you were going to be 25 years old. Like we all change a lot in that time. And so, for example, I had a wonderful young man. He was a YouTuber, and he was doing like tech unboxing in his mom's basement when he was 15. And he grew like 1 million subscribers on YouTube. And then by the time he got to me, he was a college student. He's like, 22, graduating. And he still had to pretend to be this like high schooler unboxing, because that's what the audience wanted. Anytime he tried to do content that wasn't that, like it was the point he rented out an apartment and set it up as like his high school bedroom so that he could still be making this content. Because anytime he did anything that wasn't that, he lost subscribers. And he got so sick of it that he just wound up stopping the channel. He just couldn't do it anymore. He got locked into that character that he was. And whether or not that's a good thing, there's all sorts of, we can talk about it. But ultimately, when you create value for something, what happens is your following starts to follow you for a reason. But you're going to evolve and change. And so one of the greatest examples is the Kardashians. The Kardashians are one of the largest media empires in the world right now. Nobody thinks of them as that. But do you know how many followers the Kardashian network has? Like the Kardashians.
Over 1 billion.
Yeah, it's like 1.5 billion followers. For reference, the number of people who watch the Today Show every day is about 3 million people. Kardashians reach over 1 billion people. Like they are one of the largest media brands in the world right now. But they're like 40-something mother billionaire successful entrepreneurs, but they still have to act like 20-something crazy drunk catty socialites because that's the characters that they've built. And so again, having a character allows them to be moms, successful businesswomen, owner operators running these, this $1 billion business, while then being the Kardashians that people want from them. So that's number 3. And the last thing I'll say is number 4 is I think having a character is what enables you to scale. Right? You have a team. You've told me about your team. You got editors and production people that are going to help you put together this podcast. Well, in order to scale, in order to start to build a team, you actually have to, I think, you have to give up ownership. Be okay that someone else maybe had an idea for how you lit a video or what you talked about or how to edit. And this is something I told you I'm still struggling with because I'm too connected into my character. It's still too much me. But having a character is what I think allows you to scale and have other people on your team help you so that you can create more content, reach more people and help more people. Dwayne Johnson has a team of a bunch of people around him. Like The Rock is his character. I think it's really helpful, by the way, to have a character name too. So like that's why I say Dr. Dinnan and then there's Aaron Dinnan. We're 2 different people, but Dwayne Johnson's a great example. He's Dwayne Johnson, but then he's The Rock. That's his character that he plays on everywhere. Because it's a masterclass in social media as Dwayne Johnson. So having a character is what allows you to scale beyond yourself and create more value for more people.
Amazing. Thank you for this masterclass in social media. If people want to learn more, where can they find you online and how can they help?
Sure. So I try to be at Aaron Dinnan on everything. So, follow, like, subscribe on all the platforms. Instagram, I guess, is my main one at this point, but Medium, I'm there as well. And then also my newsletter, entrepreneurofficehours.com, Substack. Just go. It's free. Everything's free. I try to be free. I'm in a blessed position where my core work is Duke University and they pay my salary. And so I get to give away a lot of the stuff that I know a lot of other creators have to and should be charging for. And I'm in this blessed position where I just get to do it because I love it. And I think it brings immense value into the world.
Well, that content is helping a lot of people. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.